Well, welcome to this quick video. What we're going to do is going to look at your mock you've just done, looking at Judaism and beliefs. The reason we're using the video is actually it's a better way for you to actually look at your mock exams and go through it in class. Now, if you're doing this, okay, really important, if you can, please, okay, use headphones. It's going to make life a lot easier if you've got it. Now, obviously, if you've got wireless headphones, that's difficult. If we can, we'll lend you some. But headphones works much better. If not, on YouTube, there is a function that allows you to put subtitles on. So if you put subtitles on, actually you can hear well, you can read what I'm saying at least. Not as good as headphones, but at least means you can still access it. Now, the way to use this is I'm going to talk through every question in turn. I'm going to talk about what the top tips are, what the question's after, talk about the sort of good sort of information you need to include, what the mark scheme's after, talk about some of the perhaps the common mistakes. And basically what I would do is listen to each question and then stop the video. At that point, use your red pen, improve your answer. But the great thing about this video is that you can replay it. So you can simply, if you've missed a bit, just press pause, go back 5 seconds, listen to it again, and you can do that as often as you like. Okay, so that's how I'd use this video. Okay, so let's get on to the first question. So the first one's nice and easy, it's multiple choice. Basically, what you've got to do is you've got to choose which one of these describes God's nature. Now, first things first, okay, this is one of those questions you just need to know. So you need to learn your vocab. So definitely the way to go with this one is flashcards. Create your own flashcards. Make sure you know those key terms. Things like Quizlet are very good as well. Make sure you know it. But chances are that you're going to come into the exam and you might actually know 3 of these, but you might not know the 4th. And so the other way to do this is sort of in reverse. Cross out the ones you don't know. So for example, the Messiah in Judaism, okay, remember in Christianity, the Messiah is another name for Christ, but in Judaism, it is a descendant of David who is going to be a king, a leader, who's going to lead the Jewish people into and during the Messianic age, when sort of the golden age at the end of time when people are reincarnated. Well, that isn't God's nature, so we can cross that one out. The mitzvot, you guys knew really well actually, and I was surprised how many people put mitzvot down. But mitzvot is basically the laws and commandments. And the Shabbat sounds a bit like Sabbath, and that's because that's effectively what it is. So actually, the process of elimination, what we can see is that actually the answer is merciful. And if you think about that, God's nature, it's talking about sort of personality trait, sort of you can see why merciful might be the right answer there. So nice, easy one to start with. 2 ways of doing it. Learn the key terms, or if you don't know the key terms, work backwards. Even if you know half of them, at worst comes to worst, you've got a 50-50 shot that way. Okay, so let's move on. Now, we get on to the second question. Now, the key thing about this, and this is true of the next 3 questions, is that you have to give 2 reasons. If you don't give 2 reasons, you're going to limit yourself to half marks. And then the other thing about this is that it is talking about the promised land. Okay, so it's asking you why the promised land is important to Jews. Well, there's a blooming great big clue in the name. Okay, it's called the promised land because if you look down here, God promised it to Abraham. So if the first thing you need to do is talk about how this was part of the deal, okay, the covenant with Abraham. So that will get you 1 mark. Now, we've also talked about the importance of the promised land in Moses' story during Exodus. So again, you can talk about how God promised Moses that he would take his people to the promised land. And actually, if you have a look, okay, that idea of it being repeatedly promised, so Moses being the example, will get you a 2nd mark. There are other things, okay. It's considered a mitzvah, okay, to live in Israel, which is the promised land. So that basically it's a commandment to go and live for Jews in the promised land. And also Jews will pray to return to the promised land on a sort of daily basis. But just simply going through the stuff that we've done, the sort of story of Abraham and the story of Moses, those two bits there could give you enough. You could also perhaps argue for the importance of Promised Land because it's a site of where the temple was and the Holy Holies, etc. But say the link with Abraham, the story of Moses, and the importance of and the promises made there, that's how you get your 2 marks there. So let's move on to question 3. Now, question 3 is a question really, and the key word in this question is influence. Okay, it's asking you how the 10 Commandments influence Jews today. So the key thing about this is it's not just what the 10 Commandments were, it's how it's actually going to affect people. And if you look at the mark scheme, really what we're after is there has to be 2 explanations. A simple explanation will get you 1 mark. 2 simple explanations will get you a 2nd mark, but it's the detailed explanation, okay? And when you get to detailed, you're getting up to 4 marks. So it's that level of detail that's going to make the difference. So let's have a look and see what the mark scheme says. So the mark scheme is quite interesting. It actually focuses on the 10 Commandments as a whole. Although actually when I was marking this, I gave marks to people who, for example, talked about, well, I think some really good examples actually, talking about how the 10 Commandments about not committing adultery affected the importance of or the view that people had about marriage and sex out of marriage and things like that. So I think that was absolutely fine. And there's some really good answers about that. But if we look at the 10 Commandments as a whole, okay, then actually what we can see is that actually they are sort of the rules, the key mitzvot for Jewish people. Okay, so that's really quite a sort of important point. Definitely get 2 marks by explaining that. They also describe God's relationship with the Jews. So again, that's important. They tell Jews how to live an ethical life. Okay, it sort of demands the standards from them. Okay, now some people actually talked about how breaking the 10 Commandments was seen as something that Jews should avoid because of them being punished. I mean, again, really good answers. Just needed to make sure you had 2 reasons and that you explained them. Now, if you didn't get 4 marks, pick 2 reasons from that list, make sure you've explained them, get your red pen done. So stop the video, get your red pen done, okay, and then we'll go on to 1.4. So let's have a look at 1.4. Now 1.4, we're starting to get into some serious marks now. So if you have a look, this is 5 marks. And the difference between this one here and the previous questions is that you are expected to include, and in fact you cannot get 4 marks if you don't include some reference to sacred writings of other sources. Now basically what that means is we need you to be able to quote from the Jewish Bible. Now again, just like the previous questions, you need 2, and that's really important. Lots of people only gave me 1 viewpoint. Now, if you can't think of a quote, don't worry. 4 marks are actually about the explanation, okay? 1 mark for the relevant teaching. So actually, the important bit here is that you can talk to me about the sanctity of human life. Now, before we go on, just be very clear. Again, this is about knowing your key terms. This is where actually having those sort of flashcards, learning those key terms is going to be really important. The other thing to bear in mind before we look at the answers is that actually there's a great overlap between Jewish and Christian beliefs. So what you've done in terms of sanctity of human life in terms of a Christian point of view will also be useful here. So let's have a look at what the examiners are after. Now, the most important thing is you have to know what the sanctity of life means. And it's that idea that humans have special value. Now, once you've done that, okay, and you understand what it actually means, that's probably given you 1 mark, you have to explain, okay, what Jewish beliefs are about this. Now, probably the most obvious thing is that God created man and woman. Yes, phrase here, breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and that actually God created man in his own image. As a consequence, okay, humans have got higher status in animal life, okay, and that humans are basically precious to God. Again, you've got the idea of being in God's image, and again refers to Genesis here, okay, and also this again awareness that God has of each individual and the value that each individual has. So most of what the exam board here is talking about is actually sort of value of sort of individuals. A load of you though were really interesting. You talked about the Ten Commandments and how actually because human life is so important, the Ten Commandments basically thou shalt not kill. Another point that's possibly worth considering is that actually sort of sanctity of human life, okay, is so important, and you've got this concept here at Pekuach Nefesh, that actually it's more important than any mitzvot. So you could also take that angle as well with that one. So I wouldn't necessarily expect you to do that. I think there are easier marks, but that's a really interesting way that you could approach the question as well. And like I say, some of you actually came from it, most of you actually came from the thou shalt not kill point, and that showing the importance of human life. So let's move on. So now we're on to the final question. Now, the final question is 12 marks. It's nearly half of all the marks, certainly a third of all the marks. 3 marks of spelling and grammar. So get this right, and you're actually going to do really well. Don't do this or get it wrong. Actually, we've got problems. Now, have a look at the mark scheme. What we're really interested in is, can you get into this sort of category here? Levels 3s and 4s. What do you need to do to get into level 3 and 4? Well, let me just change the colour. There needs to be a well-argued response. What that means is that you've got to consider the yes and the no and possibly even between. Okay, you have to have different points of view. So again, there has to be a yes and a no. You have to have logical chains of reason. You've got to explain your ideas and you've got to come up with judgments. You've got to be able to use relevant evidence, okay, and you have to apply religion. There's a hell of a lot there to actually try and remember. The good news is have a look over here. That is what you have to do. It tells you there's a list of bullet points telling you exactly what you've got to do. So my advice is really simple. Use those bullet points, tick them off as you go, and if you've ticked all of those boxes, those bullet points, you're going to have a good answer. Another thing to think about is use paragraphs. How many of you didn't use paragraphs? Okay, 3 paragraphs. Why would you agree with the statement? Why would you disagree? What do you think overall? So let's start having a look and see what the exam board think you should have included. Okay, so we start with why you should agree. And actually, the important bit here is make sure you're clear in your head. Again, it's a key term. Use those flashcards. Make sure you know those key terms. Okay, free will is that you can choose and that what you do isn't predetermined by God. So what does actually sort of Jewish teachings actually say? Well, importantly, they say that God gave people free will. So actually, free will is a God-given gift, and that means people can choose to obey and love God, or they can choose not to. Okay, that's probably the most important bit in this whole argument. Now, if you can choose, okay, that means you can make moral choices. And basically, what the argument here is that actually, if it wasn't for free will, you couldn't actually follow God's instructions. You couldn't make those right choices. Okay. And again, if you look down here, it says God would not be able to judge mankind if he did not have free will. Okay. And so actually free will and for them to behave how they want is really important. If the whole point of being on this earth is to follow God's will, then you have to have free will. So the first paragraph is really talking about why Jews believe God gave people free will, and why, if you've got free will, that means that you should be able to choose how you want. Now, there has to be a flip side to that. So the next bit is, why it is you can't behave. Now, it's worth thinking about the fact that actually God may have given us free will, but you've got these 613 mitzvot. Okay, you've got these 613 laws which Jews have to follow. Now, you may want to talk about how Orthodox Jews feel they have to be followed exactly, and Reformed Jews might take as a liberal interpretation of those. But actually, it's not, as some people said, that Orthodox Jews follow them and Reformed Jews don't. It's the interpretation that's different. Orthodox Jews take an exact interpretation, Reformed Jews will interpret it. That doesn't mean that they don't follow the mitzvah, it's just the interpretation is different. Now, having said that there are these laws, and the 10 Commandments or 10 sayings are the most famous, then the next bit, okay, is that actually what happens if you break those. So actually you could come over here and basically say, well, you can behave however you like, but Jews need to understand there are consequences. Okay, and we've discussed the fact that if you break the mitzvah, God will punish you at Jewish New Year traditionally and when you die. You may also want to think about that actually some of the big key moral ideas, justice, the healing the world, etc., kindness to others, okay, is what's expected, okay, from Jews. And actually, if you have a look, just change colour, okay, what is hateful to yourself, do not do to your fellow man. Well, that's basically the golden rule, okay, and actually, that's what some Jewish sort of rabbis and philosophers have argued is basically the fundamental point of God's teaching. And in fact, if you have a look, okay, it goes on to say that that is the entire Torah. The rest is just commentary. Okay, that the Torah is basically treat others how you want to be treated. There is an interesting bit down here which talks about this importance of living a moral life and how that extends beyond the Jewish nation. Now, we've not really gone into this, but this Noahide laws are basically the laws that were given to the sons of Noah, and that basically Jews believe that applies to all people, not just Jews. And those laws are fairly similar to the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not murder, etc. But again, it's this importance of living a civilized life. If you do whatever you like and you live in a moral lifestyle, that's going to have a massive impact. And you take drugs and you steal from people. So not only do you need to consider the impact of God punishing you, but there's also the sort of moral impact to consider on others. So that's kind of the argument against it. Now, having sort of given 2 or 3 reasons why you can do what you want and why free will is really important, it's God-given, and having considered why you shouldn't behave however you like and you should follow the mitzvot and the importance of treating others how you would want to be treated, and actually just doing whatever you want is going to have negative consequences or you'll be punished. Having done those 2 paragraphs, you have to have a conclusion. And you could conclude, this would be perhaps my example, is that free will is God-given. It means you have the choice to do what you want, okay, and that you do have the choice to break God's commands and the mitzvahs. And importantly, it's actually God's choice to give you that free will. But, and it's a fairly big but, if you do that, there are going to be consequences, okay, and actually, that will affect both the individual, possibly even God's punishment, and others. Therefore, free will is important, but actually, free will within sort of, I suppose, sensible guidelines and where possible, following the mitzvot would be the sort of the perfect answer. So I hope that's been helpful. Okay, remember the whole point of this video is you can go back over and replay the bits that you're not sure about. I'll leave this on YouTube so you can go back over this nearer the exams as well as a revision tool. If there is any sort of suggestions on how we can improve this, or if this has been useful, let us know. But hopefully it's been really useful. So thank you as much.